General Hospital will reveal 4 decisions that led to big mistakes that had serious consequences in Port Charles. Sonny was never one to accept weakness, especially when the survival of his loved ones and the territory he had built through blood and fire was at stake. Yet his body had begun to betray the steel will that once made him untouchable. The heart surgery his doctors had urged him to undergo weeks ago had been brushed aside like a trivial suggestion in a life where vigilance and constant battle were the norm. While the surgeons pleaded for him to enter the operating room, Sonny once again delayed. Instead of lying on an operating table, he threw himself headfirst into the investigation of the explosion that turned his penthouse into ashes. For Sonny, honor and the safety of his family were more important than any blocked artery. But time waits for no one. Each day that passed made his heart a ticking time bomb, ready to explode without warning. The dull aches that once came and went now lingered longer and cut deeper. The little pills he once trusted to buy him more time had begun to fail. One morning, before the sun had even risen, Sonny felt a sharp pain radiate from his chest. His trembling hands reached for the familiar bottle, but this time, the medication offered no relief. Cold sweat broke across his brow, his lips went dry, and his body collapsed in the room where he had once commanded an empire. A frantic emergency call was placed. Portia and a team of doctors rushed in. They had no choice but to prepare for immediate surgery right there at the Port Charles Hospital instead of transferring him out of town as previously planned. While medical equipment was set up and the operating room made ready, Sonny's closest loved ones, Carly, Christina, and Michael, could only wait outside, uncertain if the man who had always been their rock would survive the storm. Sonny was more than a father, more than a lover, more than a leader. He was a symbol of strength, a man who never fell. But now, his own body was breaking from the inside out, and there was no hiding it. Word of Sonny's dire condition spread quickly. Former enemies, long cowed by his power, began to smell blood. They didn't need confirmation from Sonny himself, just knowing his heart was failing was enough to stir the whispers of an uprising. In the shadows of Port Charles, treacherous figures began to move. The power map was shifting, and Sonny's once untouchable throne now trembled. Some of his associates started to doubt, while others were lured by promises from rival forces. Carly knew the danger all too well. She feared not only for Sonny's life but for the collapse of everything he had built. If Sonny couldn't return to his role at the top, not just his family, but the entire city, would be changed forever. In the operating room, as the scalpel sliced through his skin, a heavy silence fell over the hospital. Outside, as night covered Port Charles, enemies prepared to strike. If Sonny survived, he would face the fiercest battle of his life, not just to stay alive, but to reclaim the loyalty, the power, and the trust that were cracking by the hour. And if he didn't survive? The territory he once called home would become a battlefield. Those who had placed absolute faith in his strength would have to choose, fight, or be swept away. No matter the outcome, this moment marked an irreversible turning point in Sonny's fate, and in the fate of Port Charles. Alexis had always been a strong, rational, and sharp-minded woman, a lawyer who never hesitated to go head-to-head with anyone to defend what she believed was right. But when faced with the chaos in Christina's life, the heart of a mother overpowered the cold logic of a legal expert. When Alexis decided to return the divorce settlement money to Ava, she believed she was putting an end to a looming storm, burying the truth to protect her daughter, at least legally and socially. What Alexis didn't foresee was that her intervention would only make things worse. Ava, always one to exploit the weakness of others, was not easily silenced by money. She sensed the desperation in Alexis's eyes and knew that the secret she held was far more valuable than any check. Ava wasn't the type to remain quiet if she sensed she had the upper hand, and this time, she had all the cards: Christina, the car accident, and the cracks splintering the Davis family. Meanwhile, Christina was slipping deeper into a state of emotional instability. The repressed emotions, unresolved grudges, and insecurities within her were like gasoline waiting for a match. When she learned that Ava might go public with everything, Christina unraveled. This time, she didn't want to talk. She wanted to silence Ava permanently. Alexis, in her efforts to smooth things over, failed to realize that her protection had become a mask for a mind unraveling. Diane had warned her, keep Christina close. Don't let her go out alone. Something isn't right. But Alexis dismissed the concern, believing that as long as Ava stayed quiet, everything else would fall back into place. Tragically, she didn't know just how close her daughter was to the edge. Then came the day when everything fell apart. After a tense confrontation with Christina, Ava made her move. She went to the police and handed over evidence of the car accident and Christina's subsequent attempt to intimidate her. An official investigation began. Evidence from the crash site, traces on the car, and Ava's testimony painted a damning picture. Christina was arrested, and Alexis could only watch in horror as her daughter was taken away in handcuffs. All her efforts to protect Christina had crumbled. In that moment, Alexis was no longer the top attorney in Port Charles or a woman who could bend the outcome of any trial. She was just a mother, helpless, shaken, and overwhelmed with regret for not acting sooner, not by hiding the truth, but by confronting it head-on. In jail, Christina was no longer the confident, outspoken young woman who once inspired community meetings. She sat in silence, her eyes distant, battling thoughts she could no longer suppress. She knew it had all gone too far. The emotions she had buried for so long, her anger at Ava, her deep-seated resentment toward her mother, had exploded in a single reckless act. But now, no amount of remorse could undo the damage. Alexis sat in her office, staring out the window at a Port Charles that continued to move forward without her daughter. She understood, with painful clarity, the cost of her misguided protection. She hadn't just lost faith in the law, she had lost the precious bond with her daughter. Even if she used the rest of her career to defend Christina in court, nothing could erase the pain of watching her child fall into the hands of justice, a tragedy Alexis had unwittingly helped bring about. This failure hadn't come from a courtroom defeat or a rival's cunning, but from the blind love of a mother. And the most heartbreaking truth was that now, even Alexis was beginning to doubt whether Christina could truly be saved. Kai had always been the embodiment of confidence, a talented athlete, intelligent and ambitious, determined to surpass every physical limit ever imposed on him. When an injury threatened the professional football career he had spent his entire life building, Kai didn't panic. Instead, he turned to the most advanced medical technologies available, convinced that modern science would grant him a second chance on the field. For him, failure was never an option, and recovery was just a temporary chapter in the epic success story he believed was waiting for him. But when Portia, the head of the medical team in Port Charles, warned him about the serious risks involved with the innovative procedure he was considering, he quickly dismissed her concerns. Portia, with her extensive clinical experience, had seen many cases like his. She cautioned him that his body wasn't ready, that the procedure was still in the experimental phase, and that there were no guarantees of safety. Yet, Kai didn't listen. In his eyes, her warnings were just negative noise meant to hold back those who dared to dream big. Trina, who knew Kai better than anyone, also noticed troubling signs. She saw him grow restless, hiding the increasing pain he endured daily, and avoiding questions about his recovery progress. She begged him to reconsider, to think twice before placing everything on a risky surgery. But Kai, driven by an overwhelming desire to reclaim his former glory, pushed forward. The day of the surgery arrived. In a state-of-the-art operating room, all eyes were on Kai. The man willing to stake his entire future on a single procedure. At first, everything seemed to go smoothly. But then, an unexpected complication arose. Monitors began to flicker, vital signs fluctuated erratically, and the surgical team sprang into action. Despite their efforts, the damage had already been done. Kai awoke in a haze of confusion. Parts of his body no longer responded. His toes, his feet, the very tools that once propelled him to greatness, no longer obeyed the brain's commands. A numbness spread, followed by the undeniable truth: the groundbreaking procedure he had placed all his trust in had failed. Portia stood beside his hospital bed, trying to maintain composure as she shared the initial test results. Trina, her eyes brimming with tears, couldn't conceal her pain as she watched the man she loved begin to fall apart. Kai said nothing, not because he didn't want to, but because words felt meaningless in that moment. What was once supposed to be the path to victory had instead become the end of the line. Kai's future was no longer uncertain, it was shrouded in darkness. Would he walk again? Could he ever play football? Could he forgive himself for ignoring the advice of those who genuinely cared? Once the bearer of dreams and triumphs, Kai now faced only the echo of shattered hopes. In Port Charles, Kai's story was no longer just that of an athlete battling injury. It became a cautionary tale of pride, the blindness of ambition, and the importance of listening, something that, sometimes, is the only thing that can save a person before it's too late. Kai had always carried himself with an unwavering sense of self-assurance. He was the kind of man people noticed immediately, an athlete with a gifted physique, sharp mind, and an insatiable hunger for greatness. From his earliest days on the field, it was clear that Kai wasn't built for mediocrity. Every sprint, every goal, every trophy only fed the belief that he was destined for legend. Injuries, to him, were merely obstacles to overcome, not endpoints. So, when a devastating injury threatened to permanently sideline his career, Kai did what he had always done, he pushed harder. Rather than dwell in despair or accept traditional recovery methods, Kai sought the latest experimental procedures promising rapid regeneration. The words, cutting edge, lit a fire in him. He convinced himself that he would be the success story they wrote about in journals, the miraculous comeback that defied logic. Doctors in major cities advised caution. But Kai had his eyes set on Port Charles, where a bold new technique was being quietly developed. The potential to walk again, run again, and play again was all that mattered. In his mind, the choice was obvious: take the risk, claim the reward. But Portia, the head of the local medical team, knew better. Her voice, grounded in years of surgical experience, was calm but firm. She warned Kai that this wasn't a guaranteed fix. His muscles were still inflamed, the nerve pathways unstable. The data was promising, yes, but far from conclusive. She urged patience, restraint, a measured approach. Yet to Kai, such words felt like chains. He interpreted her concern as fear, something he had no time for. After all, hadn't he always known his body better than anyone? Trina, who had stood by him through the highs and lows, saw his facade begin to crack. She noticed the pain he tried to mask, the tremors he shrugged off, the nights he sat in silence rather than celebrate milestones. She pleaded with him, not as a partner in science or medicine, but as someone who loved him deeply. Please wait, she urged. Please think about what you're risking. But her pleas, like Portia's, were swallowed by the roar of Kai's ambition. To him, delay meant defeat. On the morning of the surgery, the sterile white walls of the operating room seemed to reflect Kai's determination. Monitors beeped steadily. Specialists prepared with precision. At first, the procedure went as planned. There was a rhythm, a calm. But then, without warning, something shifted. A tremor in the readings. An irregular heartbeat. A sudden drop in blood pressure. The surgical team scrambled to stabilize him. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. The damage had already begun. When Kai regained consciousness, he found the world altered. He could blink, breathe, speak, but not move parts of his lower body. Panic settled in like a storm cloud. He tried to lift his leg. Nothing. Tried to flex his toes. Stillness. The paralysis crept up his spine, not just physical, but emotional. All the confidence that once shielded him evaporated. The once unshakable athlete now lay in a fragile shell of himself. Portia stood beside his bed, her expression a mixture of sorrow and resolve. The test results were clear: complications during surgery had caused trauma to the nerves. There was no promise of recovery. Trina, sitting quietly by his side, reached for his hand, her grip trembling. Kai couldn't look at her. The pain in her eyes mirrored the guilt erupting within him. He had gambled his future and lost. As the days passed, Kai became a prisoner in his own mind. The rehab specialist spoke of long-term therapy, assistive devices, and lifestyle adjustments. Each word felt like another nail sealing shut the door to the life he had once known. He thought of the stadiums, the roar of the crowd, the sweat, the glory. Now, all of it felt like a lifetime ago, belonging to someone else. Questions haunted him in the silence. Would he ever walk again? Would the world still respect him if he wasn't a star athlete? Most painfully, could he forgive himself for the arrogance that had led him here? The answers never came. Only the realization that sometimes, the most dangerous injury isn't to the body, but to the spirit. In Port Charles, Kai's story spread quickly. At first, it was whispered, hushed tones of disbelief. But soon, it became more than a tragedy. It became a warning. He was no longer just the athlete who dared to reach too far, he became a symbol of unchecked ambition, of pride that drowns out reason. His tale echoed through hospital corridors, locker rooms, and classrooms alike. Kai Taylor had once been defined by his drive, his hunger to win. But now, he was defined by something deeper, the lesson his fall had left behind. A reminder that strength isn't only in speed or stamina, but in knowing when to pause, when to listen, and when to accept help. And in that painful stillness, perhaps, Kai might begin the journey not back to the field, but towards something even more important, healing.